Well, what a treat for me to be here with you, Jeff, today. Jeff Sonnenfeld is an amazing man. He's a friend, he's a hero, he's a mentor, he's a teacher to me and to a gazillion other people. AB, MBA, PhD from Harvard, 10 years at the Harvard Business School, 10 years at Emory University, now serves as a Senior Associate Dean of Leadership Studies and the Lester Crown Professor in the Practice of Management at the Yale School of Management. 8 books, 100-plus scholarly articles, Academy of Management Distinguished Scholar Practitioner Award in 2023, Ellis Island Medal of Honor, regular contributor to New York Times, Wall Street Journal, The Economist, Forbes, CNN, PBS, CNBC, and so many more. Of course, all of us see you on CNBC regularly. This morning on MSNBC to comment about the horrific situation in town. Here last night where a gunman walked into 345 Park with an automatic weapon and took the lives of himself and 4 other innocent civilian folks. Terrible, terrible situation. But I've gotten to spend some time with you, Jeff, and get to know you better through your Chief Executive Leadership Institute, CELI, that you founded. You are the CEO whisperer, as has been said by many, many people. And we have Stephen Tian here, who's the whisperer to the CEO whisperer. And now backup whisperers to Stephen's whispering. There's a lot of whispering going on around here.
Yes, sure.
Your latest book, and besides, we were just talking about opening the Nasdaq. You're the only academic who's rung the bell both at Nasdaq and the New York Stock Exchange 10 times.
Right.
What are you, just a bell ringer? A Quasimodo? What's going on here?
Just a regular ding-a-ling, yeah.
But you're a counselor to so many on transitions in leadership through your council for CEO leadership that I'm lucky enough to attend many of your events. I see you working with people on their transitions all the time. What's on your mind now about the state of affairs? You held a conference for your Leadership Institute at the Ziegfeld Ballroom just several days after Brian Thompson had been shot outside the Hilton last fall. You were terrific then. You were sensitive to what had happened, but sensitive to the fact that we couldn't change our lives, so we needed to convene. It was a very high-profile event. I thought you were at your very best that day. Mayor Adams was one of your guests there. You certainly arranged for plenty of protection. But in the months since then, Jeff, talk to me about the phenomenon of the Luigi Mangione social media following. And are we going to see something similar as a result of this horrific incident last night?
It's a fantastic question. And I hope we have the next day, at least until dinner time, to talk about this, as this is now midday. And I certainly would like to use up as much of your film as we could to talk about such an important topic. But I have to begin just by thanking you for that beautiful introduction that I wish my late mom and dad were around to hear. And they would have, I've sort of added some corrections. My dad would have tried to figure out what you left out, and my mom would have wanted to sort of point out that maybe, he is a little messy in his room at home and things. But I think anybody who listens to this podcast, after your 3rd page, will start to hate me. Even I start to get a little embarrassed and dislike myself.
But you're the academic's academic. You not only teach, but you practice, you coach. If someone were going to dream up the dream academic's job, I think you'd be the
It's a fantastic job.
You love what you do, and you do it with great enthusiasm.
Well, and apparently it's easier to do than you make it sound, because when you step into my classroom, you are a magician. My biggest fear every year when you mesmerize my class is, should I stop off at the men's room or forget my laptop, run back and get it? Sure enough, you'll take control of the crowd before I get there. You'll know every single student in the room, not just their names, you'll have their life saga, and you'll be conducting an incredibly beautiful Socratic class yourself.
But my secret mission there is I'm recruiting.
Oh my gosh, whatever it is, your secondary agenda is, your primary one is, you can do my job better than I do it. I couldn't possibly.
You know that's not true. I hold you in the highest regard because you are so skilled, and I just love to get better.
I love flowers. I love food. I love everything you do. I wish I was I was a social. Well, I'm colorblind, so I can't handle the floral arrangements. I
Some
obviously
accuse me of being colorblind when they've seen my work.
is I used to put together. My dad was a small merchant. He used to put together some really horrific combinations, as you would know. And you put together the haberdashery and things. Well, you can't mess up too badly, shirts and ties. But when you start to get people trying on some of the clothing we had, especially coming through the era of Carnaby Street and the Maud Paisley explosion, when my dad got into it coming out of the Second World War.
You remember when these bell-bottom things came along?
Oh my gosh. I still remember my mom screaming that her son is not going to wear those bell-bottoms of the wild people. These peace medallions and octagonal purple granny glasses.
What
and
an impact Woodstock had on the haberdashery business.
So, I figured I can't go wrong because everything was clashing then, but even I...
Gatsby shirts.
Oh, good Eisenhower jackets. We used to also have this
I
really...
worked in a men's and boys clothing store.
I know, way back, before the social work era, you knew all those
Well,
things.
high school, college, even beyond.
There's bell bottoms, and then they tried to tone it down with flares, as you recall. And then I shouldn't admit this.
Polyester
Oh.
pants, shirts, they were horrible.
Oh my God, they were so shiny. They're iridescent was the term for them. And I remember, I shouldn't admit this on camera because I certainly will not be welcome back to campus. But there was no Levi's for gals then. And we had dungarees.
Yes.
And when women would come
Levi
in,
was the high-price brand in 1968 at $4.50 a pair.
and we couldn't do it, so we had Lee's, which I'm wearing right now, which was the knockdown brand. But you get to fit the women then too would come in with the inseams and everything else.
Clothing store with bell bottoms, all of a sudden all the gals are coming in.
Do you remember? It was incredible.
We were awkward. What did we do here?
It was awkward, but as an adolescent,
We had to station a guard at that set of fitting rooms.
Exactly right. So getting through that era was frightening. But even so, as you'll remember, people would come in. As a guy would come in there, if he's by himself, he'd look for a saleswoman. Maybe worst case, a guy that you just don't want to walk out in the street and look silly. Yeah. A woman buying clothing doesn't want something with patterns are going to go in the wrong direction. They're going to look out of style. And men, they just don't want people to laugh at them. So I'd put the clothing on these people like they were trying some stuff up in the parents' attic or something. And it was fun costume. I'd make a wreck of the store. But many times, both of my parents were sick in the hospital at times. So I was actually running this family's little clothing store. Being colorblind, and build up the sales, and then you ruin it all with some horrible combinations. When you get the clothing on, the expensive stuff that these guys can afford, that of course I'm just wearing a jacket, that's when you destroy it all. So it was hard, colorblind. I remember got my driver's license. The state trooper in Pennsylvania at Trevose said, "Look, kid, I'm feeling sorry for you. Here's some raw swatches of color. It's 3 letters, starts with an R." After a couple of tries, I figured it out. But as we move from state troopers into the serious topic you raised of law enforcement, law and order in society, respect for human life, Jim, is just blood curdling. You were the third person to walk in December when we had our event right after that horrific shooting, which, as fate would have it, at 54th and 6th, I guess, right at the Hilton Hotel. We were right opposite that, 50 footsteps away in the Ziegfeld Ballroom Theater. Is the first person who walked in was Arvind Krishna of IBM, and he said, "Jeff, our security people on my board said I can't be here." He said, "But I want to tell you, I'm probably going to be, if not the only one, just one of a few that comes, because I want to support you, and I know what you're doing by continuing this conference right across the street where that horrific murder of an innocent young man took place, who wasn't, not that it would have mattered, but he wasn't really the CEO anyway. He was a division manager, but it shouldn't have been the CEO.
But he was a father, he was a husband.
A hard-working guy, worked his way up. It was horrible, and in grain silos and working his way up is all 200, and you were number 3 who walked in. I said, Arvin said, "I don't know. We'll see what happens." All 200 of you guys showed up in a statement of, and it wasn't for me, although Arvin says he was. It was a statement of defiance that this nation's corporate leadership is not going to be held hostage by exploitive nutcases. And in that case, we saw an inflamed left, but we know it's on the right too. Some of the tragic, complex irony of our nation's history, as you would know, is that the left and the right meet in some weird ways, like almost like the horseshoe ends coming together, a magnet, is that William Jennings Bryan's populist campaign in 1896 had on the right Tom Watson, the agrarian rebel, the very anti-Catholic, anti-Jewish, anti-black, anti-just about everything except whatever he was, which was a rural southerner who wound up becoming, and a publisher, the Atlanta Statesman.
He's an anti-urbanist too.
Anti-urbanist and anti-Wall Street, and guess who joined him on many of those issues, not all of them, many of them. On the left was Eugene V. Debs, and Eugene V. Debs was a wobbly IWW. They later called themselves, as they properly were, the American Socialists. And well, they're both part of American political tradition, but they're extremes that have a lot in common. They're very anti-institution. They have a lot of bias and bigotry in them, and they vilify.
It's interesting how you explore the commonalities of the extremes.
They were both lieutenants to William Jennings Bryan. Believe it, they had offices next to each other, and it's like Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong were both disciples of the same Sun Yat-sen. You know, it's like, how could that be? Is that weird things happen? You know, you go to Argentina, everybody's a Peronist, and whether or not the left, right, or center in Argentina, everybody's a Gaullist in France, no matter who you. Is that sometimes, yeah. So in this case, we have people who've developed a sense of righteousness about taking the law in their own hands and mobocracy, and that's not our nation. We don't stand for that, especially killing innocent people. But even so, to have, you know,
You mentioned earlier, Jeff, this young police officer, an immigrant from Pakistan, who was
living the American dream.
That's what you said, and it just rang a bell for me. I was lucky enough a few weeks ago to be invited down to Michael Milken's opening of the Milken
in Washington.
National Center for the Advancement of the American Dream.
You know, he was born on the 4th of July, so.
In your community in Philadelphia, right? And so the opening was tied to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th of July. And it's a remarkable journey to shine a light on the American dream, which you do in your work all the time, which Michael Milken does in his work, and now with the Institute, directly across the street from the Treasury and the White House. Beautiful collection of 6 buildings that he put together. But it just so impressed me that first evening we were there, and they featured a film, half a dozen different stories about people living the American dream. And it's an immigrant story, it's a disabled person story, it's a person of color story, all in pursuit of wanting to do better, wanting to provide for theirs, give their offspring an opportunity for an education and for a career and for a family. And when you boil it down to that, it sort of makes all those other things that extremists get worked up about seem a whole lot less important.
Right, those extremists are not the American character. What you just saw there in Washington and helped contribute to, and I have other friends who joined you there, are people that we admire. You represent the core values. You personally, others, as happened to be Stuart Miller of Lennar, who was also a friend of Michael Milken's, who was there, and I mean, just so many businesses, whether or not they're family origins or whatever. I mean, half of the Fortune 500 are either run by first generation or actual immigrants. That apple pie,
Is that right?
You know, you think of apple pie or God Bless America or hamburgers. These are all foreign imports that define America, and we can't let extremists define our character. That notion of self-improvement and somehow the world can always be that
Living values,
Right.
respecting your neighbors, respecting property, all of the basics of the American dream.
we don't always get it right, but we're always trying to get it right, and that's what brings us together. And to have the grandiosity and exploitation on either side of the political extremes is troubling right now, and I know that we'll get a chance to talk about technology before you throw me out of here. But as we saw in the nascent days of social media, how that is exacerbated, of course, with what AI and other technologies can do to divide us by manipulative.
Well, before we get to technology, you've opined recently on the pendulum on immigration. And you've always been in favor of immigration, you've always been in favor of legalized immigration and thoughtful planning as to who and when people are allowed in to pursue the American dream. It seems to me that the press in the last week or so has said, even the people who are very happy now about the border being closed, are now saying, okay, what's next? Let's do the Act Two, which is to have some vigorous and thoughtful debate around what does legal immigration look like.
No, I think that's so true. Where you draw the lines as to who is native to this nation, that's it goes back to the land bridge that brought Asians into this country that we identified as Indian. This has always been a nation of immigrants from somewhere, and to celebrate those traditions, we celebrated them, in different ways, different countries, cities. There's a great book by a sociologist from Penn many years ago, Digby Baltzell, called Puritan Boston, Quaker Philadelphia, and it took a look at how immigrants were received differently by those earlier waves of immigrants. In Puritan Boston, everybody wanted to show that they were among the elected, that they were God's chosen. So they held on tightly to power until very recent decades.
Yes.
Whereas in Philadelphia, the Quakers were very successful, but they stepped aside often to their mainline communities, and then they created opportunities for Irish Catholics, Italians, Jews, and others as we got into different races from, of course, African American and other surges of population that came in, is to find opportunities for them to move into initially municipal, and we used to talk about the police forces and utilities and stuff, and into other roles in society. And Philadelphia then wound up becoming a place where everybody had a chance. But Boston, because you had the sense of viciousness, and there was a very different culture in these cities, and it's just something to define the American character. There are different ways of accommodating immigrants, and the populist term is something which explains the divisive terms, but progressive doesn't. There's a group that's called themselves progressive that are not progressive.
They've co-opted the term.
The progressives are people like you and me, and perhaps some on this that are viewing this podcast, and certainly readers of Worth, is they're in the center. They might lean this way, lean that way, but they're basically in the center. That's who, the last populist candidate was literally 101 years ago for national office.
I was very young at the time. But.
Yeah, I voted for him enthusiastically. Was a Republican, and his running mate was a Democrat. It was La Follette, Fighting Bob, as they call him, Robert La Follette, who was big on building bridges and infrastructure, and Jane Addams' settlement houses for immigrants and things like that, and safer workplaces, with Taylorism, which was imperfect, but trying to bring a more organized, safer workplace. And his running mate was Burton Bud Wheeler, a Democrat from Montana, and that's where much of the business community was, and those people were the progressives. The populists on the right and the left was something different, but they didn't want to be called socialists or populists anymore. I mean, you go to Bernie Sanders' office now, you find he still has a plaque celebrating Eugene V. Debs. Not to be ashamed of it, but that's the American Socialist Party. And now I will grant that at least here in New York City, we have somebody who is running apparently on the Democratic ticket now as the choice, who identifies himself as a socialist. Well, that's fine. That's who he is. He's not a progressive. He's a socialist. I like him or not, but that we should label the parties.
At Harry and David, we work with our hands as well as our hearts, so you can enjoy sharing it as much as we enjoy making it. And that's what life's really all about, sharing with those we're closest to, no matter how far we are apart. Harry and David, share more. Jeff, you're an academic of highest brand awareness.
Does that mean I just gave you too much history in the last 2 hours? I'm sorry.
Not at all. But toward that, I wonder, we've heard both Trump and people from the Democratic point of view all talk about these people who come here and get educated, and then we don't allow them to stay in the country. You're in the thick of that fire. Is there an enlightened point of view that you think can make pace here? What percentage of our student population in the U.S. is foreign?
Well, believe it or not, in the college, let's say Yale College is maybe only 10%. People would think it's much larger, and that's true of many of the targeted Ivy Leagues. In graduate school, it's more than twice that. Sometimes, almost 4 times that, depending on what science or engineering fields. I think he does want the U.S. to succeed. I think he does have a lot of grandiosity and self-aggrandizement, and there's some some greed going on there, but I do think he also is patriotic.
Because in this case, it sounds like he came around.
He came around, just like with NVIDIA. We saw 2 weeks ago, Jensen Huang changed his mind, not by making any contributions. Arvind Krishna would tell you that at IBM, in the history of IBM, they've never given $1 to anybody, either any party, of political contributions, and they're happy with the direction of, for the most part, technology policies. Michael Dell feels the same way. He's not a partisan person. But they have, unfortunately, they've been frustrated. The Business Roundtable hasn't been as great lately. They were in recent years, but right now they're missing the moment. So we're seeing sectors. Many of your friends in retail, as you know, at Walmart and Home Depot and Target, they've been meeting with President Trump separately. And similarly, the automakers got something through the EU, which is not perfect, but it's a lot better than we thought. It's
Yes.
not, North America's deal is not perfect for them right now, but by working with them on their own, they're going as industry sectors, not with buckets full of cash, but with arguments about what's in the nation's best economic development interests. And he'll hear that. He wants a good deal.
I know your Chief Executive Leadership Institute awarded Mary Barra from GM Leadership Award last year. That was well deserved. And how's her tenure going?
She is amazing. She has been a leader on, as far as U.S. automakers. I don't know how we classify Tesla right now, but in EV, zero emissions, zero collisions, and zero congestion. And she's making great progress on that. I am sorry to admit on camera that I happen to drive a Lincoln. I like the styling of a Lincoln. I only buy American myself. Every bit of it's made in the U.S. But the Cadillacs are fantastic. And my next one will probably be a Cadillac. There's no reason not to buy American. And she's a great example of product quality. But also through COVID, she very skillfully opened up some plants that had been shut down, an air conditioning plant, a ventilating plant that they used to create respirators. And similarly, for an upholstery plant, they reopened for PPE equipment for COVID. And she worked on with their head of HR, what the safety protocols were to keep the factories rolling that were still producing cars and things. And she operates around the world, whether that's on trade issues, on product quality. She took over at a time, people sometimes talk about the glass cliff, I don't know, where women get the job when nobody else wants it. GM was not in good shape when she got it on many fronts, and one of them, they'd gone through two CEOs in a row coming right after bankruptcy, and the two CEOs in a row were right off the board of directors that were in the telecom space. They didn't know anything about consumers. They didn't see. She stepped in there and had to inherit the ignition problem.
All right, so you lift her hood.
Right.
What are her qualities that have made her what attributes that she have that's caused her to be successful when there are several flameouts before her?
You know, nobody's ever asked me that, and I could go on till dinner talking about her. I don't. She's not I work with her, but she's not a personal friend. She's not a client. She's not a sponsor.
Well, so she's not perfect then.
Well, she's not. It's not that I've turned down any offers. We haven't gotten the offers, but yeah, she's imperfect that way. But what she's done, if you just look at the crisis itself, for example, of this exploding cars because of the ignition key problem, she right away owned up to it. She didn't look to finger point, and she said,
"You consistently point that out in great leadership."
Right. And she went to Congress, and they started pounding her, and people were using her as convenient scapegoat, as they like to, for the grandiosity of office and these long, both parties.
And their motivations when they do that are the clip that's going to be on TV in their home state?
Clip on the TV in the home state, and to say that it's corporate greed has driven American safety off the roads, and that's just not the truth. But what she said is, we messed up. You know, Jamie Dimon is the same way. Is that he can be pugnacious, he's very direct, and when they mess up, he hits himself harder than any legislator or safety critic or consumer financial advocate would. He's his own toughest critic, and that's how Mary was. And she said, and here's my team. And who was her team? Her team were all the people that wanted her job. Some of them, many analysts thought were going to get it before. She happens to have General Motors in her blood. She went to General Motors Institute, which has changed its name since then. But she's a product there. Her father was a tool and die maker in General Motors, and a humble person through origins and everything. So
we don't have the 15 hours I was hoping for to
no,
chat.
No.
But
I've
all this stuff to go through with you. How could you do that?
You and Stephen and team at Yale, when I visited there 2 years ago, we're doing this amazing work around accountability of companies. When Russia invaded the Ukraine, the policy was you have to stop doing business in Russia. And some companies did the right thing and withdrew right away. Some companies faked it. And you and your band of volunteers from your student population, championed by your whisperer, Stephen, you held everyone's feet to the fire and made copious reporting on what was really going on. 3 years later, how effective has that been? I can't understand. You're the economist. You're the seer. How's the Russian economy doing, and how has that boycotting of Russia impacted things? And where are we now if President Trump decides to up the game on restriction?
In fact, the very day of inauguration, he took issue with Putin's economy. We thought was going to be helpful. It's taken him a while to come around to see that, in fact, there was no discussion of Ukraine entering NATO in 2014 when he invaded and took over Crimea. There's just no way to blame Ukraine for this. And this is a peaceful, sovereign, neighboring nation that we said we'd protect when they gave up nuclear arms, and to have Putin's predecessors recognize the sovereign nation of Ukraine, and then to have this happen, now a million Russians slaughtered of soldiers, and somewhat less than that in terms of Ukraine. It's horrific. That's what's being done. But we were so proud that we had a role in helping to catalyze a stampede. I guess it's a mixed metaphor for a magazine publisher, but catalyze a stampede of exits that is 6 times what it was in South Africa in 1988. I never got an embrace for what the role of the exit of private sector means. That the public sector sanctions matter a lot, but the private sector condemnation in South Africa of the 200 companies led by General Motors and IBM and Coca-Cola and others really made a loud statement to the average white South African, and that this is Bishop Desmond Tutu was the name I was going to mention on that he said it's the movement of private sector that really got white South Africans to pay attention. Similarly in this case, and we've seen this whether or not it was in Romania with Ceausescu.
But you were taking media to task, who were lazy.
They were lazy.
Who was accepting Russian propaganda as de facto the case.
And exactly right, holding corporations accountable so that we wound up with a grading system A through F, and calibrating the companies, the spotlight of it. There's some companies that didn't get it right away, but very quickly corrected, like McDonald's. Within the first week saw, you know what, we shouldn't be here. And although we have some franchises, we control most of them, we could turn off the spigots and leave, and they did. That was hugely influential for others in consumer goods. And holding corporations accountable so that we wound up with a grading system A through F, and calibrating the companies, the spotlight of it. There's some companies that didn't get it right away, but very quickly corrected, like McDonald's. Within the first week saw, you know what, we shouldn't be here. And although we have some franchises, we control most of them, we could turn off the spigots and leave, and they did. That was hugely influential for others in consumer.
What happened in the population in Russia as a result of seeing McDonald's, Starbucks, Birkenstock?
Well, they started to ask questions, but not enough, is that only 4% of Russians download a VPN to get the truth. They know that
only 4%.
It's horrible. It's not like that elsewhere. It's like Jack Nicholson, had once said in A Few Good Men that they can't handle the truth. They know that there's no opposition party, that the opponents have been killed. They know that the press has been shut down. And that literally over 100 top oligarchs have been killed by Putin. 160 of them just since the invasion of Ukraine, which is the entire leadership of Gazprom and the rest of the energy industry. It's not exaggerated. Literally, there's everybody that worked with any one of the top 3 in the energy industry. Those people all fell out of windows and in front of cars. It's not exaggeration. They know this, and yet they're not rising up. But it takes this kind of pressure to do it, is that the average Russian needs to be reached this way. It's not just Putin. We're not going to attack his wealth by these boycotts, by these sanctions. However, when the government sanctions work together with the private sector boycotts, it's very powerful, and that's how we saw government change in Libya and East Germany was relatively bloodless. You remember when Eric Honecker stepped down, it was the role of this, and we've known GDP says he's growing faster than Russia or than Germany or Ukraine. It's just nonsense. We know that's not the case, but he has nationalized so much of the industry as a wartime industry. So there's no seed corn. He's not investing in the future.
Is there any risk of him collapsing economically?
Yeah, he'll be out of cash unless this country throws him a ring buoy by late winter. Is that he's got $300 billion of cash reserves that are dwindling quickly now. He's running enormous deficits, and unlike any other country like ours that run big deficits, somebody pays for our debt. There's nobody investing. Nobody. There's zero. Foreign direct investment into Russia has fallen to zero. There are no new stock offerings there. Nothing is growing. Nothing is building. And to start with, Russia was never an economic superpower. Never. It's a misconception.
The economy is the size of Italy.
Italy. It's smaller than Chile. They're not a top 50.
Smaller than Chile.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Now, it's a big landmass. It's a bigger landmass probably than China, and certainly bigger than Canada. But the population and the economy is very small.
11 time zones.
Yeah, nothing. So and there's nothing. There's no finished good. That watch you have, I'm sure it was not made in Russia. Your car was not made in Russia. Those shoes are nothing that anybody buys other than raw materials really comes from Russia. It's like the old feudal system where in the colonial days where we're getting raw materials. That's all Russia brings to the world market. Their energy business has collapsed by 2/3, and that was their biggest export. So they're in trouble, and they're not making money on.
So predictions. Here we are, midsummer of 2025. 6 months from now, what's happened there?
6 months from now, he can't survive. So this is why he is going full throttle with the bloodiest campaign yet on Kyiv. Across parties, across State Department and Defense Department, our friends and experts really thought that Kyiv would fall in 3 to 5 days. They've proven us wrong. They have
And changed what warfare looks like.
They're going to survive. But Putin is trying his best to have the bloody, the flicker of the candle, the final flame at the end. That's what we're seeing is the final flicker of Putin. Now, we thought that Prigozhin, initially his friend and then his enemy, was going to be a final draw for all kinds of warlords around Russia to come out and challenge Putin. That didn't happen. Prigozhin lost his nerve when his family was put under severe threat and arrested, and then he thought he had a deal with Putin, and of course accidentally blew up in a plane. Nobody has a deal with Putin. He can't survive economically. Now, it's not a good thing that we and they each have 6,000 thermonuclear warheads pointed at each other. But we can't use that to guide policy, or else we just give him the world just because he's a neighborhood bully.
I wonder what shape his nuclear arsenal is in.
I wouldn't know. They may have been reinvesting in it. Certainly Ukraine regrets letting theirs go as part of.
Well, hearing what the corruption has been like through his military, as he discovered when he went to war, I wonder how many of those rocket fuel tanks still have rocket fuel.
Which is not built on identification, respect, affection, trust, but it's built on coercion, then nobody walks out on a limb on your behalf. They get whatever they can get away with, they take. And surely the corruption runs deep. It's not perfect in Ukraine, of course, and we have taken Zelensky to task. I think President Zelensky in Ukraine is honest, but I think he has some advisors that look for opportunities, and he's got to cleanse that more in his country. But in Russia, it runs deep, and it's horrific. And I have to say, before you throw me out of here, you take a look at somebody like Putin that won't leave office. He'll be there forever. And we talked about our friend Fred Smith, who had a delayed retirement, but ultimately had a very good succession. Is what happens in many of these leaders in late life. Some of them who see themselves as self-styled heroes, Ferdinand Marcos or Fidel Castro or the Shah of Iran, by late life they become whatever dragon slayers they thought they were early career. By late life, they start to resemble the very dragon themselves. And I just really want to applaud people like you and your brother Chris that can figure out a way to build something bigger than themselves. What you do in philanthropy, the way you reinvent yourself from clothing to retail, online. My friends at UPS were so wowed by you when you were merely using the exploding world of telephony for 1-800-Flowers and everything you've built out in your portfolio around that since embracing new technologies, and I don't just mean the internet and e-commerce, what you've been doing with AI to save us that don't get the right messages written in time, is Martha Stewart or Donald Trump, bring to us as bringing class to the masses. What's the pathway to success? Whether or not it's exaggerated or false, is that we want to pursue that pathway. But the only thing the American public doesn't tolerate is cheaters. That's what they like success. Hypocrites and cheat, and that's what they saw there. And if these people are in the AI space that we don't understand, that we're feeling it threatens our careers and feeling impoverished by it all, and there they are, cheaters, it all groups together. So that's where it really goes viral. Because we've seen in the railroad industry and the aerospace industry where we had couples form. There's a guy that I knew that was kind of an old curmudgeon of a guy, Harry Stonecipher, who was, it turned out to succeed a skirt chaser before him at Boeing. And he himself had an affair at work. They happened to both be separated at the time, not our business, but it mattered there because of the company's reputation. That didn't go viral. The company made a change. And
you've been all over that, helping to advise there, and it's so important for the whole country and our economy that they get that righted.
It was hard. It's hard to change, the culture. I think Boeing. I actually think that his predecessor didn't do anything wrong, but was not a good communicator. And the Boeing situation, it's a complex one. Nobody inside Boeing wants to blame the victims, but 26-year-old captains of running piloting two huge planes that had hundreds of people on board each that hadn't had proper maintenance. And had reported problems with the identification system, the signals that are supposed to let them know of a problem, and to not properly deal with that, and this MCAS pilot training system that they weren't properly trained on. Now maybe there's a shortcut that was taken for them to have it on a laptop instead of in a more expensive simulator. It wasn't done though to recklessly deal with people's lives. That most pilots had no problems with this system. These pilots did. What happened was awful. And then we've seen all kinds of other safety problems that are inexcusable that have happened with bolts flying off.
That's what they tell us.
But you talk a lot about culture, and the one thing I can tell you for sure is that each spring when I get to go visit you and your students up at New Haven there at the Yale School of Management, I come back, I tell my kids, I tell my grandkids, I can tell my friends, my coworkers, boy, I wish I was smart enough to be a student.
They all say they want to be, you could ask my team, they all say they want to be you. And again, the way you make these moves, and a lot of people who leave your kind of position, it's like the orchestra conductor leaving the orchestra. A violinist, when they leave, they have their instrument with them. When the boss leaves, their instrument was the organization. How do you recreate that? And you manage to continually cover that abyss of insignificance to be significant in so many other realms. So they all want to be you, and you come in there. I'm not kidding. If I'm not in there on time, you'll not only have the chalk in your head.
Look who we get to hang around with. Nigel Travis,
Oh my gosh.
Fox, and a roving guest contributor each year. This year it was Eric Nordstrom. What a treat to be in
This
your
is
universe.
great. And the retailers that people love, that are not. We know some retailers that have a lot of grandiosity. The people you've just said are none of that.
Real people.
Yeah.
And I so enjoy being part of that because we all get to hang around with you.
Oh, thank you so much, Jim. I enjoyed it. I hope we covered a portion of what you wanted.